Hey troops, this is Jeff Evely, Ops Sergeant Major with Veterans for Freedom, back with you now. I have with me James Formosa and the V4F Padre, Harold Ristau, who's back with us to speak today about some of the morally injurious policies that we have in place in the Canadian Armed Forces right now with respect to COVID. This is a bit of an issue that's near and dear to our hearts here at V4F, of course, because a lot of us have spent time in that institution, a lot of time in that institution, so we understand the kinds of impacts that this poor leadership and poor policy can really have, especially at the lowest levels where people are vulnerable, and especially to some harmful social trends and things like that, and maybe they're not as insulated to the economic impacts and the social impacts of this kind of a crisis. So anyway, we're seeing a lot of attrition right now with the mandates. We're hearing all kinds of different rumors, anywhere from something like 6,000 to 9,000 soldiers who are being 5F'd, which is tantamount to being fired from the military. That's the same release article that they got rid of serial killer colonel under. So it's about as serious as it gets, and they're doing all this for our soldiers just exercising a little bit of bodily autonomy. We all understand that when we sign up, we got to go to the needle parade on basic training more than once. Step on the X and you get a shot in each arm. Step forward one pace, another shot in each arm, and a couple of weeks later, a couple of weeks after being sick, you can go back and do it again. So nobody really has a problem with any of that in the Canadian Armed Forces. It's just that's not what they're being asked to do right now. And so yeah, this is something very different, of course, and we're all very concerned for our young people and everyone else back there, our peer groups that we all left behind in the military. So we like to take whatever time we can to dedicate to this issue. And we have a couple of guys with us here who are very close to this issue. So James was just released 5F over this whole affair, and he went through the grievance process, which I've been through many times myself, if I'm not mistaken. I filed 10 grievances in the last 15 years of my career, just by and large for the sake of helping people to do their jobs properly. And it can be a very infuriating process because you have to teach them how to do their jobs as you're going through it as well. So I'm really interested to hear what James has to say about his experience on that front, and then we have the Padre as well, who's very well versed on the spiritual exemption kind of stuff there, and that's something that across the board we've just been seeing trampled all over people's religious freedoms, people's religious beliefs. I know myself, I've filed a few human rights complaints here in Nova Scotia on the basis, one basis would have been political belief, which is covered under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Code. And another one would have been creed, because, I say to you guys too, I'm not amongst the faithful so much. I suppose some people say I'm a little bit spiritual because I do think that kind of emotional health or spirituality is important. But yeah, I stopped short of taking a leap of faith, and that's what is required if I am to believe that any of these mandates are doing anything to help the situation. So I won't do it. And anyway, I've had them come back to me and say, "Oh yeah, no, that's not really a deeply held tenet or belief or anything like that. That's just kind of your opinion. So it doesn't really mean anything." I can only imagine what it must be for some people who are so deeply religious and committed to that way of life. Hearing that as well, I'm not saying that my experience is all that much more diminished than theirs was, but I tend to be used to it, I guess. So, whereas a lot of folks obviously are not. Anyway, with that, I thought maybe we'd start with the Padre there. Padre, why don't you give us a little bit on the the spiritual exemption there. What have you been seeing on that front? Have you been seeing much in the way of accommodation when it comes to religious exemptions in the CAF? What are you hearing coming out right now?
Well, so I've been retired for a number of years now, but I serve as on a position as a civilian representative with a bunch of other religious leaders called the ICCMC. No longer. I've resigned from that position for a number of reasons. Vaccination issues are one of them. This subject matter is another one. So I don't have direct information on that whole process, but I've got eyes on the ground through that capacity that I worked in. So when I've kind of, I guess you could say, whistleblown on the CAF on the way they basically behaved immorally, illegally, it's been by complaints that I've received from the guys that I represent to the Queen or to the chaplaincy, rather. So bottom line is, and to follow up on that, if you're interested in the whole story, you can go to the COVID Coalition Alliance. What was it called? The testimony from, where dozens of people give their testimonies as to how there's been all this mistreatment over the COVID policies. Anyway, you can go on the COVID Coalition Alliance page. I think it's Preston Manning is one of the guys that was overseeing that, as well as a couple of CBC people who had left the CBC over dissatisfaction on a lot of what we don't like about the CBC as well. And you can look me up and you can see my whole sort of testimony with the background on the misuse of the spiritual.
Is that the citizens hearing?
That's right. I'm one of the guys in the citizens hearing. So Andrew and I were there together. He comes first, and I came afterwards. So the text, that's right, there it is, and you've got the text there, I think, somewhere also. Okay. I'm not saying you need to play it or anything, but if you're interested in the whole thing, it went over really quite well because it was really just really quite factual. Where I basically said, the religious exemption avenue was a sham. There was no intention to give anyone religious accommodation. Mm-hmm. And according to the criteria they're using, Sammy loves when I say this. Even Jesus Christ couldn't have gotten exemption, right? That's how hard it was. So there was so few. There was like so few chaplains. A bunch of chaplains asked for religious accommodations. Chaplains, okay, these are the guys that are the religious guys, right? Yeah. And we're declined it. Okay, declined it. And those that didn't receive it didn't necessarily cave into the temptation. They just either got fired or they did the wiser thing where they just said, "I'm not going to I'm not going to tell you what my status is," and then they put you in the category, right? Mm-hmm. You get paid and you're in a category, whatever you call that category. It always, the acronym changes every decade, every 10 years or so, right? So you're still in the system, but you're not doing anything. So bottom line is, you don't actually have religious people who sympathize with the religious accommodation process. They're fairly hearing the claims, or the the claims that are coming through. So you're anybody who wants a religious accommodation is systematically being discriminated against if they're religious, because you don't have a sympathetic ear. And if you do have a sympathetic ear, it's probably not all that sympathetic, because that means the guy on the other end compromised his faith, knowing that he shouldn't have gotten the vax, or he should be standing up for ethics and saying the way this is being handled is terrible, and they're not doing it. So the most sympathy you're going to get is a guy who's sort of chicken, right? Who doesn't want to, doesn't have the balls really to stand up for the truth. Yeah. So so that's one portion of it.
Speaking of that, I was just going to ask: is it common practice for pastors to have their white jump wings? How common is that?
No, okay. Not common. Yeah.
Okay.
No. There's a couple of us that have that. So yeah, right. But which leads to another point, right? People are healthy in the military, right? So this whole notion of medical or religious accommodation, well, we all know with the universality of service that, there really isn't a really strong medical reason, unless you're pregnant or something like that, or a woman who's pregnant, to stand on, right? So, so you really, if somebody didn't want the vax, right, the injection, whatever you want to call it, all right, they really didn't have any choice but to go the religious exemption route. Now, the religious exemption route doesn't now apply, as you and I have talked before, Jeff, to people who aren't religious.
Right.
And again, I'd love everyone to be religious in the sense I want everyone to believe in Christ as their savior, right? But I'm not going to treat anybody differently who doesn't believe like I believe. And so it's insulting to me that somebody who is an atheist can't say, I have a problem with this injection for these other reasons, even though I can't show you a church or a religious group that I belong to or a member of. Okay. So that's terrible in itself. And that goes against, like you mentioned something earlier about, oh, well, we don't care about your belief, sincerely held belief, because that doesn't matter. There's no foundation for that. The history behind the sincerely held beliefs it doesn't matter if there's no foundation behind it. You could just, when that stuff was invented, I didn't like the fact that was invented, that anyone could say, well, I'm going to have a sex change because I have a sincerely held belief that I'm a man or a woman or the other, or I'm a dog or a banana, do this, I want the operation, right? But historically, that's what we were basically saying. If you say I have a sincerely held belief, that is your trump card to say you can't touch me. Like, I can hide behind there. That's my entitlement card. So from a legal perspective, this whole idea of saying now you've got to justify your sincerely held belief, and you've got to justify how sincere it is, how much of a belief it is, and how held it is totally unprecedented. And so what you ended up happening is you had all these people wanting to avoid the injection, and some of them were kind of going, well, I'm going to do a sincerely held belief request, even though, that's right, not a claim, a request, even though I don't really belong to a church or whatever. Well, what choice did they have? They had no other venue to say, I got a problem with this because I don't believe the science is accurate, and there's a cover-up going on. And we see that with the vaccine injuries. And you even see that, fellas, you read that briefing note that Jeff sent out, which was horrific. I should have had a copy of that when I was actually in my old position as an ICCMC rep. I should have had a briefing. I should have seen that briefing note. And the bottom line of that briefing note from the chaplaincy was, well, because it's all proven that this is healthy and good, people that aren't vaccinated are now a security risk. And so they need to be vaccinated, or they're bad for the operations. That was one of the arguments, bottom line arguments. And the second argument was, and by the way, most religions think it's all okay and they don't think there's any problem. So majority rules, isn't that how truth works? Isn't it a majority rule thing? Isn't that, how truth works, right? I'm being facetious, right? It never works that way.
No, that's the bandwagon fallacy.
That was the briefing note. And I'm reading this, Jeff, and James, right? I'm reading this, Jeff and James, and I'm going, what the is going on here? Like, that's the official documentation. So that briefing note says, you do not have a leg to stand on if you make a request to not get the vax. And that's exactly what we saw happen. Nobody was getting it. A couple of guys got it. One guy got it because he was a Hindu, and, you don't touch people that are of real minority faith groups, right? Because it's like, well, like we don't understand them, so you get what you want, right? So one guy got it for a dietary reason. He said, my religion says I can't do this because of it has, orange peel in it or something. And it's like, all right, well, we're not going to go there, right? But nobody else got this thing. So you get you get nobody. The guys that are then deciding on who gets it are not actually a sympathetic, objective, or compassionate. And if you guys know, because you guys have been in the military, you know what chaplains do, right? Chaplains are the guy you go to exactly in cases like this, where you're not sure about how to approach this request. You don't go to a chaplain for a leave request. That's easy. You go to the admin officer, the admin person, for the clerk. You go like, I know how to deal with a request on those levels. The chaplains deal with all the gray stuff, all the stuff that touches the heart and the spirit, your conscience, all the fuzzy stuff. And that's why you've got chaplains there, the ethical stuff. And so then what you had is you had a chaplain branch say, when chaplains were saying, well, what do we do with these requests rolling in? You actually had a chaplain branch say, don't talk to people with with these requests at the moment. And it was indefinite how long they were going to take before they let the chaplains talk to their troops about these questions. So I knew chaplains that were coming back complaining to me saying that's an unlawful order. And I was like, absolutely, it's an unlawful order. Your job is to talk to these guys. You're their go-to. That's how big this cover-up, lack of a better word, was going, that the chaplains were being muzzled and silenced. And then when they were allowed to speak, they were given a grid, a sheet of paper saying, these are the kind of questions now you ask the guy making the request. And it was, I've got it on my laptop. I've shown you, Jeff, at least and it's entirely rigged. I mean, it's actually, it almost mocks the guy in front of him, saying like if he asks you this question, you say this, or if you can't prove the guy's in church every day of the week, well, he's not a faithful Christian. So he's not what does that mean in terms of the membership of his church body? Or, well, if his church body isn't fully agreed upon a vaccination policy, well, that body is discredited. I mean, it was just absolutely absurd. So, I mean, I was one of the only guys going to bat over all this stuff, by the way, but I mean, I basically lost the battle. So the thing was rigged on all these different levels. So in the coalition, COVID Coalition Alliance, whatever you called it. What was it called there again, Jeff? The testimony of
there was the testimonials, and that was at hang on, I got it. I still have it up.
That was the bottom line. Is that was what I said there.
Canadian COVID Care Alliance.
Canadian Care. That's right. It was the Canadian Care Alliance Citizens Hearing. Right, Citizens Hearing. So that was what I did in one portion of it, and the second portion of it was basically saying, by making people, by tempting people to go against their conscience, or actually putting them against their consciences, is a recipe for PTSD. It's a recipe for making people not do their jobs well. They become security risks. Okay, and you have a vast minority of guys who got the shot not willingly. Okay, they should have struggled more over getting it, but they didn't want to get it, and now they're wondering about it, and now they're you're going to see the repercussions of this down the road. So my argument was, you are making a less strong CAF, not a more strong CAF, by making people go against their consciences to get the jab, which goes totally against the spirit of that briefing note you guys saw from the chaplaincy, which is saying, well, no, unless you get it, you're making them stronger. And we're seeing that right now with all the bizarre discussion around the boosters, right? And, what does it mean to be fully vaccinated, and all the cover-ups over injuries and all this sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly, you're less physically healthy, but I'm talking about you're less spiritually healthy. You're less in the head zone. Mm-hmm. You've got bad headspace in terms of pulling the trigger and doing your work. Right. When you're sitting there going, that guy, the system made me do something that I was so totally against. What does that mean about my self-respect, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'll just leave it right there and move it over to James. Maybe he wants to say something about that. I don't know.
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say, I think what you're talking about there, when you force somebody to do, when you order somebody to do something that goes against their deeply held beliefs and principles like that, that's something I think we were talking about the last time you were on, Padre. It's a moral injury, which is in the title of today's video. So I just wanted to hit that, because that is a source of trauma in the Canadian Armed Forces as well, and it's a result of the kind of social abuse that we're describing right now, that the chain of command has a nasty habit of inflicting on the troops and our young people. But go ahead, James.
Thanks. There's a couple of really important points you raised there. So the fact that any of us right now even have had such open access to the briefing note that you mentioned, that was governing the decision-making process for all the current chaplains. The reason why we have that anyway is because, as folks like myself were going through that process, as it was being poorly executed anyway by all these people that had never had to do a process like this, something totally unprecedented, you could tell that the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing. Mm-hmm. And in the process of giving us a lot of response paperwork, they included as an attachment that full briefing note that we were never meant to see as the people that were being put through the process. And and this is speaking from personal experience at my regiment, when myself and a few other folks in that boat received the briefing note and were as shocked as you were about what it said and how it essentially set all of us up for failure and to never be accommodated. We raised that concern, and the response we got from our chain of command was, they weren't even really hiding it. They just said, you weren't supposed to see that. Please destroy all copies of that document and don't share it with anyone. So
is this the one I have up here on the screen that you're talking about? Is that
let me see
CS
here.
Directive 003 on CAF?
No, sorry. It was the chaplain's briefing note that described how, as the Padre mentioned, how they were
accommodations based on religious grounds.
What's the protection? What's the protection level? Is it protected what? Protégé what?
It was unclassified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, see, isn't that interesting? Things are top
secret.
Still,
it was unclassified, but they still said, you weren't supposed to have that. Please destroy all copies, burn it all.
I love it.
And another important thing too that you raised earlier on was this idea, and it was really shocking to me as well, the fact that before they even opened this, well, they sort of fakely opened a door to allow people to put in a religious accommodation. My chain of command and everybody at my regiment out west there was told in no uncertain terms that don't even bother sending in any kind of request that comes from anything like sincerely held personal belief or a matter of personal conscience or conscientious objection, because we are not going to even read them or accept them. They told us right from the outset that no arguments from conscience would be entertained whatsoever. And all of us, regardless of where you are on the spectrum of religious belief, everybody was kind of looking at each other saying, since when did who cast the vote, or who decided all of a sudden that for this particular issue or any particular issue, that without any debate or argumentation, they can just say at the outset that you're not allowed to even submit an argument from your conscience? Like, they've just decided without any reference to us whatsoever that your conscience doesn't matter in this particular case. And furthermore, I will say, I've got to give credit where it's due. The chaplains and the Padres, at least on my base, had the good sense to realize that they still had an important duty to administer to all people, regardless of where they were coming from, and to be that person, that point of contact when they needed to talk to someone. So they didn't stop talking to folks like myself and others that were going through this process. They were, to my experience again, similarly shocked and sort of blindsided by the unprecedented nature of how all of this was rolling out, and the sort of confined box that they were being put into by being told before they even got a chance to minister to us that, well, you're only allowed to say certain things, or you have to lead the folks that come to you down certain pathways to squeeze out, in a certain sense, some answers from them that will neatly, according to that briefing note that we weren't supposed to see, but will neatly filter them into a guaranteed space where you can easily deny them. And as we get later on into this, we'll be able to see, do a deeper look even into my own grievance and the response that was given, where it shows quite clearly that they never had any intention of sincerely engaging with any of our real arguments. I would argue, and it might be a little biased on my part, but I'd like to say that the evidence, or the description of my belief that I gave was pretty basic and easy for anybody to understand, especially if you're in the chaplaincy and you went to seminary or you have degrees in theology. I was doing pretty basic Sunday school stuff, if I could be so bold. And nevertheless, the standard response was the Lebowski argument, which is, well, that's just like your opinion, man, and no one else really cares, or you haven't shown, like in my case, be specific now, I gave an argument based in scripture that describes what the nature of the conscience is according to scripture. So I describe a theological framework that paints the human conscience as the living voice of the Holy Spirit that dwells within you. And so to force someone to deny or violate their own conscience that's telling them what's either right or wrong in a given instance is to tell them to, in a certain sense, disobey God himself. And even though I laid that out, and I provided, again, numerous verses from the book of James, book of Romans, talking about how our conscience convicts us. So we know certain things are wrong, whether or not we really want to believe it or accept it. It kind of accuses us regardless. And the standard boilerplate response I usually got to things like that at all levels in this process was something like, well, what you just gave us wasn't an argument from religion. That was just an argument from mere conscience. And so it's mind-blowing, because the response you get is like, well, all I was just doing for pages and pages to you was explaining how my belief in the nature of conscience is inextricably tied to my theology. So how they're just stripping it away because they don't happen to like it personally is the only real assessment I can properly give.
Yeah.
I think that's the poo-poo logical fallacy, right? Where they just kind of say, oh, poo-poo, that's a silly argument. And it's like, well, no, you haven't addressed any of the points that I made. You just kind of dismissed it out of hand as if it were somehow ridiculous on its face.
And furthermore, the main thing that they really loved to touch on, which the Padre also mentioned here, was the only argument, and this is going all the way up to my response from the initial authority, which is that Brigadier General that we'll be looking at later on here in the decision letter that they gave to me. Sure, they say that I didn't conform to a corporate religious authority, when the DAOD on spiritual and religious accommodation explicitly states that any member coming to the chain of command with this kind of request, their belief does not need to conform to any established religious tradition or authority. And that's the only argument they gave to me, is that I wasn't showing an establishment to authority, except for their own admission that I was just relying on essentially the entire body of the scripture that I profess to believe. So scriptural authority apparently doesn't matter, Padre. It just has to be the right person in the right uniform that they've deemed an appropriate religious leader to their mind.
So I'll throw in, just from the atheist perspective here, and like I said when I started, I've made the argument before that I never take a leap of faith. That's kind of the way I've lived my life, my entire life. There's one leap of faith that I'll take, and that's that reality is real, and that my perception of it is somehow tied to an empirical reality that's external to it. Like, I'm really having this experience. That's really all it is. So as I said, I mean, for me to believe that any of these measures are actually anything more than, say, a blood sacrifice and a face burqa, I'm going to need to see some evidence to support that. And these are some pretty extraordinary claims that they're making, especially in light of the timeline on which this new medicine has been developed. And if I am to believe extraordinary claims, then I need to see extraordinary evidence. That's just the basic principle that I'm applying, and it's one that I've embraced my entire life. And when I'm looking at something like this assessment tool that they're giving to Padres to determine whether or not my lack of belief is sincerely held, it says, is the belief sincerely held? And they're looking at things like, if they sincerely hold a religious belief, is it factually linked to their concern about the vaccine and stuff like this? So they're not really leaving any room for someone who isn't pardon the term, it's harsh, but superstitious, as in somebody who doesn't believe in the supernatural, to seek any kind of a spiritual exemption. So that's discriminatory.
Well, there's a difference, though, between superstition and believing in the supernatural, but I don't know if you want to get into that. But
no, but I'd like to have you back to talk about that. Absolutely,
of course. There's also about whether the devil or God was the good guy in the garden. That's another.
Yeah. I'd love to have that conversation.
But no, I mean, it's that you're not religious. You don't believe. Well, you're not religious in terms of an organized religion, and you're excluded from this process, right? I mean, this assessment grid doesn't allow you to make an argument to, have a request not to take the injection.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's bottom line, and that's un-Canadian, right?
Well, I mean, the Canadian Human Rights Act lists religious grounds as discrimination, as prohibited grounds for discrimination, and the courts have already ruled that your lack of belief is entitled to the same religious protections as every other. It's a religious position, and it's entitled to the same protections as every other religious position. So this kind of flies in the face of really everything they've been up to with the kind of the banning of padres in the military and so on and so forth. So it's incongruent, I guess, with a lot of other practices, and just as incoherent as any other policy there.
And if I might add as well,
right
too,
yeah.
the thing is here that's important is they clearly, because again, it's such an unprecedented space to be in, and nobody really knew how to judge anything in this regard.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of shows again the gaps in their own understanding, because
they're making it up as they go.
And first of all, if they want you to, the only way for somebody like myself, for instance, is to justify something by, I literally have to point to, for example, a church that I attend regularly or something like that. Well, for certain folks in my position, well, what if, like, if I'm posted out west in Manitoba and all of the churches available at the time are closed off or won't accept my kind, let's say, like I'm not even allowed to attend a local church because there's even persecution happening in those churches, or they're shut down and their doors are closed and I'm not allowed to attend. It got to the point for folks like myself who were attending underground basement churches in people's houses because that's the only place where we were allowed to congregate. And you better believe that if I got a letter from the person leading that small faith group, they would certainly not accept that as a corporate religious authority because it's not large or fancy enough.
Yeah, certainly. And the other thing is, they're like, when they're getting into scrutinizing things, like they're saying, like, note 1, a belief that is simply personal, moral, or a matter of conscience is not a religious belief. Well, the court
how do they explain that?
Only religious beliefs are protected under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Well, where's the list of those religious beliefs that are protected under the Canadian Human Rights Act?
And I think
again, I'll use myself as an example. Like, I don't actually have a religious belief per se. I have a creed. It's something that I've kind of developed over the course of my lifetime, but it's as deeply held as anybody else's. And where it says here, like, take, for example, the fact that I don't take a leap of faith. It says the extent to which the member's religious beliefs are applied in daily life. Well, how could that possibly be observed in my case? How can they read my mind to tell whether or not I'm taking a leap of faith at any given moment in my daily life? I mean, it's absurd and dehumanizing, I think, to presume that people in a position of authority are in any kind of a position to assess something like my deeply held religious beliefs. But I digress. Sorry, James, if you were trying to jump in there, go ahead.
Well, it's just this idea that when they're stating these sorts of claims, it's like the pervading sense from a lot of us that were dealing with it was these people don't even understand the concepts on a really elementary level that they're even engaging with, because how does it make any sense whatsoever to even understand this issue when you're saying that somebody's religious beliefs has no intrinsic tie to, like, their conscience or their morals? Like, that's people just, like, if you open up a dictionary, what does it mean to have a religious system of belief? It usually informs, your morality, your personal life, your conscience, those exact things that they're trying to say. No, there's something like conscience is this different thing that has nothing to do with religion. And then when I give them a purely religious or scripturally based argument on the nature of what conscience is, they're just saying, well, you're just talking about conscience, not religion. So, like, we're not even speaking the same language here. And
Sure.
I think that's, of course, on purpose.
Well, yeah, and I think that consciousness is kind of really like the substrate under which all these layers are piled upon, So religion is kind of something that you use to guide and structure your framework around morality, around when we talk about the conscience, maybe something like Socrates talked about the spirit who guided him. He had a spirit who told him right from wrong, and I'm pretty sure he means like a conscience that we're talking about right now. And I think James, you were mentioning something about, we're the ones who have to live with our decisions, and our conscience is going to inflict that aggressive criticism upon us, whether we are necessarily walking the right path or not. And that's something that Freud talked about quite a bit with his theories on the superego, as in the additional ego, the one that we're not necessarily conscious of until you really spend some time carefully meditating, I guess. But there's somebody else in there who is terribly aggressive and abusive towards the ego, and what Jordan Peterson talks about in his discussions around lobsters and the kinds of parallels that we can observe in our brain structures and the impacts of depression and being dominated, I think is kind of what it comes down to. When a lobster loses a fight with another male lobster, he gets dominated. He goes into a state of depression, and that's kind of what's happening right now with a lot of this vaccine policy. Is it's bullying. It's fundamentally just the powerful, pushing around the downtrodden and telling them that their lives don't really mean anything, that all of this stuff that they've been standing for and sacrificing for and bleeding for all their lives, it's just not that important after all. Even though, I went into a recruiting center and off to 2 wars, believing that human rights and fundamental freedoms really meant something in this country. But James, I can tell you want to say something. So go ahead.
If you may just scroll down here,
Sure.
Thank you for having my grievance submission set up here. You can see, and this has been characteristic of the entire process for folks like myself, which is hundreds of pages now. But you'll see here, yeah, that's good.
Okay.
I explain in my grievance where I'm saying that I reject their rejection of my accommodation request, because I say right here in my opening argument, if you will, that the chain of command failed to meaningfully engage with or address any of the theological concepts I provided.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, it says here, the primary line of reasoning provided by Lieutenant Colonel Broussard and Colonel Rutland in order to dismiss my accommodation request is that my argument is a case of freedom of conscience, not freedom of religion. However, it presents a fundamental misunderstanding of my religious beliefs, for which I have already provided explicit scriptural explanations. And this is the key one I gave there, is Romans chapter 2, verse 15 states the following with regards to the nature of conscience, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean while accusing or else excusing one another. I said this passage, along with the other ample sources I've provided, should demonstrate that obedience to one's conscience, according to my religion, is synonymous with obedience to God, since the moral law is written upon our hearts in order to bear witness to God's righteousness in all things. Well, Padre, you let me know if I'm way off base here, if I've completely misrepresented Christian theology.
No, and this is why I've argued that this process has been like a religious inquisition, like a medieval inquisition from the get-go. So you've got your chain they're making theological judgments right there, right, by saying your conscience is something separate from your religious convictions. I'm a Lutheran chaplain, so we're the ones, at least you probably both know Reformation history or something about it. Martin Luther and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Here I stand, my conscience doesn't allow me to give into this abusive system, the Roman Catholic system at the time there, obey the Pope in spite of the errors, and lies and so forth. And he's willing to die for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, with the success of the Reformation meant individuals were now able to make these sorts of decisions on their own. They're able then, with the printing press being invented and so forth, read the Bible on their own, think for themselves, right? A lot of these things that were sort of foreign prior to the invention of the printing press and public education and all that. You had a few people, a lot of abusive priests, for instance, and not a lot, but abusive priests that were kind of controlling the knowledge. Knowledge is power, right? So Luther's sort of the iconic guy who kind of emphasizes the importance of conscience as hugely important to the Protestant movement at the very
Mhm.
least. So in my faith tradition, as a Lutheran, I cannot disentangle conscience beliefs from dogmas or something like that. I mean, so it's an implicit insult for
Mhm.
someone to say, oh well, well, your church body, the Lutheran Church seems to be okay with vaccinations, and so but a few of you've got a problem with it, because your conscience is bothering you. Well, who cares about you?
Right.
It's implicitly
Exactly.
insulting. Okay, it's a tenet of my faith, right?
Mhm.
So the difficulty again with this, however, from their point of view, conscience, well, for anyone's point of view, but particularly on the military, conscience is a dangerous thing. All right, and it's a good thing actually that it's dangerous, because conscience is the thing that says everybody in the chain of command believes that we're doing right in that battle, or we're treating that guy right, but there's one guy that stands up and says, wait a second, that's not right,
Mhm.
or wait a second, something doesn't add up, and my conscience is telling me something's not right here, and I'm going to put up my hand and I'm going to be the guy that calls it out. I mean, we want people like that in our society, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
those are the people that
Need them.
that not only change society but keep a pulse on things, keep people accountable. Those are
Mhm.
the ombudsmen. So that the chaplaincy is supposed to be like that, but every human being is supposed to be like that. Certainly, every Christian ought to be like that. And so when James says, "I can't help but to obey my conscience," well, that's a good sign of a healthy conscience. Actually, that's a sign, James, that you're not a psychopath.
Yeah.
Because psychopaths are people that don't obey their consciences if they have them.
Or don't
You see,
have them.
we want. However, you've got a military that says, "Wait a second, I don't want a guy that's like, out in Afghanistan, shooting the bad guys," and all of a sudden he says, "I can't do this anymore because my conscience is giving me trouble."
Mhm.
And there's a good point there, because you can have an uninformed conscience or a misinformed conscience. You can have a guy out in the field in Afghanistan fighting at Spearwan Gar against, the bad guys, right? And all of a sudden, he says, "Wait a second, um, those are actually civilians over there. I'm done. I'm not shooting anymore." And your whole team gets blown up because the one guy moves away. What he might not know is, no, they're not civilians. They're the enemy in civilian costume, right? Civilian clothing. But the strategic guys know that. But the tactical guy might not know that. So he might disobey the order based on something he feels not right. His conscience is giving him trouble, but it's
Mhm.
misinformed. You see, so that guy can be dangerous, right? Whereas he can also be helpful in another environment. So we do have to be careful with conscience, especially in this day and age where it's like everyone is a kind of walking religion unto themselves, and everybody's
Mhm.
conscience matters. I mean, you've got people, again, saying, my 14-year-old daughter thinks she's a man, and let's start putting drugs into her so she can get her sex change. Why? Well, she just feels that way. Isn't your feelings equal to your conscience? So this is like, this is what a hyper individualist North American society looks like, right?
Mhm.
So it is really quite complicated. But from a Canadian law perspective, they have laid out what simply held beliefs means. They have laid out that it does not have to be tied to a particular organized religion. I personally have some troubles with just everyone just obeying their conscience on everything. But I'm saying that this is the way Canada has been going until COVID happened. Until
Mhm.
COVID happened, when these elites just kind of took control, saying the individual doesn't count at all anymore. And
Mhm.
so, James, it doesn't matter what you're going to write. We've already decided what we're going to say to you, and we're going to insult you all the way through too.
Yeah.
We're going to be your priests, we're going to be your bishops, and we're going to tell you how it's going to be. Now, when the vax first came out, I think I've told you this, at least, Jeff, on that maybe the last podcast. I don't remember if I said it already.
Mhm.
I had about it came out on a Thursday. The Canadian Forces sent a letter to all of us saying, we need to know what the vaccine policy is of all of your religious group. And if you don't have a vaccine policy, it means that you're okay with the vaccine, right? We're all talking about the injection, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
okay. So I was the only guy that I know got busy like overnight. I think they did it on a Friday, actually. They said, you've got to have this thing done by Friday, 1600. You know that move, right? Push at people at 6. Everyone goes on the weekend. If you miss the deadline, well, you're screwed because we gave you time, right? But like it's a total tactic where you don't give it to me on a Monday and you give me time to proofread the stuff, right? You give it to me on a Friday, you're gonna give me crap. I'm going to give you my crap, right? Because I don't have time to actually fix the stuff. But anyway, they said, we want your vaccine policy. And I said, look, this is all new to us too. There's no church body that's ever had to justify their position on these moral questions before. We don't have a vaccine policy, and you can't deduce from that we don't believe that what's driving the controversies around that vaccine isn't something we do believe in or have issues with. For instance, in my church, we're pro-life. We're totally opposed to stem cell. In any cases, we're totally opposed to the fetal tissue. Okay, but we also, like James was talking about, the bodily autonomy of the Holy Spirit. Your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. I am not permitted to just put stuff into my body that I don't know what that stuff is. It hasn't been tested out. You know what I mean? Like that should suffice as an argument alone for me not submitting myself to this vaccine. So our church has policies, or we call it teachings of the Bible on stuff like why you're not allowed to come up to me and put a needle in my arm, right? That, without my permission, right? But it's not a vaccine policy. But anyway, this was what they're pitching at us, saying you need a vaccine policy. So I put one together with the doctors of our church, and who, funny enough, most of them were pro-vaccine. And I was actually one of the few that wasn't actually pro, but we put something together to say, well, our church is divided like everybody else. We don't have a policy, but these are the reasons why Lutherans have good reason not to want to get this injection. And conscience is one main tenet of our belief system. Conscience, bodily autonomy, the question of abortion. There's a whole bunch of other things that we all had listed there. But what was shameful? That I think we were one of the only ones, if not the only one. And that was the thing that went through. And that's why you saw in the briefing note there, you fellas, in the briefing note saying, well, most church bodies don't have a vaccine policy on this stuff. They're okay with it, right? Well, that's not true. Imagine somebody coming up to you guys, to the branch, the government comes up to you and says, we found this supernatural fruit from Sri Lanka. Here's this like glow in the dark purple little substance, and it's a super pill that's gonna like make all your soldiers healthy. So we're gonna make you guys all take that now. And then you have all these people like Christians going, wait a second, I'm not good with that thing, right? Well, wait a second, do you have a policy on like weird glow in the dark fluorescent supernatural pills policy, that can discredit, your people that belong to your church is getting it? Well, if you don't, well, you better prove it in the next like 2 days, because this is coming down the pipes and you don't have a leg to stand on religiously or conscience wise or as a believer or whatever. You see how absurd it is. Well, that's how we approached this vaccine thing. It was absolutely absurd. Well, anyway, I played the game. I did what was to be done to try to support the troops, got the policy out. It was actually accepted. And actually, that's why we had actually an easier ride in the sense, because we weren't one of those groups that said, oh, we're okay with it, and you're an idiot if you're not okay with it, and you should just be all getting it. We weren't one of those religions, right? But it didn't amount to anything, because that thing you guys are complaining about, which I can't stand either, the grid, the assessment grill, was handed out to chaplains, and they were told this is the only way you can now assess whether the guy in front of you has a leg to stand on in saying no to the vaccine. So James, early on, you'd said, and I don't want to seem like I'm dissing my guys and I hate chaplains or something like that. I don't want to seem that way, but I do want to be clear that a chaplain has access to the chain of command, has full access to the chain of command. You guys know they stand outside of the chain of the parade square, right? Symbolic of the fact that the chaplain is the guy, no matter rank, that is allowed to basically whistle blow when something clearly is going wrong. So I don't have much sympathy for chaplains who say, you know what? Yeah, I don't understand why we're not getting like why this is going on. We're disturbed by this too, but we're going to do it anyway. Or like, really sorry, like cry on my shoulder now, and I'll pray for you. But like, what are you going to do? It really sucks. You know what I mean? Like every single chaplain should have said, this is wrong. This is wrong. This is wrong. And now we're gonna go for, I'm gonna go to the general and I'll piss off the whole chaplain branch because they hate when you break the chain and whatever. But that's what my conscience is compelling me to do. So the word of God. And this is the thing about conscience as a Christian. It needs to be supported by the word of God. And this is what James is doing in his wonderful narrative that you give, by the way, James, is you do both. You say, this is my conscience and it's a tenet of my faith, and here's the word of God to prove it. And like I say, they're poisoned against you from the beginning, because they basically say, like, speak on, we're going to say, you're done, bye-bye, off you go, right? So this whole notion of it being sort of poisoned all the way down the pipes, and you didn't have there's a few chaplains that actually did stand up and they did lose their jobs. I know one chaplain that two chaplains were opposed to this, and then they were divided. They were reposted specifically because they didn't want these two guys communicating with each other and trying to basically question the system. And so they actually posted them into different units, right? Just to deal with these guys. So I don't want to sound heartless, because I know everybody's trying to keep their pay and their families and their livelihoods and all that sort of stuff. But again, when we look at what this means in the greater picture, no wonder, the convoys, why they succeeded, right? Everybody's going, all of a sudden, I'm not the only one, right? There's something bigger going on here. And chaplains still have the ability to say, this is bigger than just a couple of guys wanting an exemption because, they don't want someone to tell them to get this injection because, for whatever reason. If we don't take a stand, we're really letting this really evil system, this global, whatever you want to call it, this global movement or this bizarre spiritual spirit, I would say antichrist globally stuff going on. I mean, whatever you want to call it, if individuals don't stand up. And James, you've stood up, and Jeff, you've stood up, and I just wish more people would stand up. But I am glad, though, James, with all that being said, is that you had guys still in your court saying, not just dismissing you and saying you don't have a good argument, or, you're a crazy Christian or something like that. And I'm glad that wasn't your experience. So.
And I would say too, they like the direct contact I had with those Padres, they were really good in the sense of, in their defense of me, even though, as we say, there might be some criticism about still going along with some of this policy, they did their level best to rail against some of their mainline points that were coming down from the policy, to try to really hammer home to whoever was still not listening higher up that there can be no doubt or debate whatsoever with regards to the sincerity of my belief and how held it is and things of that sort. And Jeff, if we could just go back to my grievance for a second, I'll show too, this is something that would appeal to anybody regardless of their backing, because, Jeff, I think you'll particularly be fond of the philosophical nature of how I broke down this argument here in the next paragraph, because this, again, is something that should be a defense, not only for myself, but literally anyone that would be in this process. As I said, due to the reality of other religious accommodation requests being approved, like the Hinduism example you gave, Padre, in the CAF, in other religions and through other chains of command, this further reveals an institutionalized form of discrimination and segregation based upon prohibited grounds in the Canadian Human Rights Act with regards to religious belief. The approval of those individual religious accommodations suggests that certain specific individuals with their own particular and unique religious beliefs have somehow been deemed worthy of accommodating by virtue of their accommodations being approved. So by logical necessity, this would suggest that my religious beliefs are only being rejected or denied for accommodation through attacks on the specific nature and contents of my religious beliefs themselves. And therefore, the burden of proof and responsibility should fall upon my chain of command in this grievance process to demonstrate how my specific and personal religious beliefs are unworthy of accommodation in comparison to those other requests and religious beliefs that have been approved by other convening bodies?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And there's kind of something I think fundamentally flawed with the way that they're approaching this. And if you read through, like we're talking about the framework and the accommodation and all this, in order to qualify for consideration as a reasonable accommodation, the member will need to demonstrate a sincerely held religious belief that would preclude him from being vaccinated. And they go through all this stuff. But look, the overall thrust of this document, as far as I'm able to assess, is essentially like, here is the framework by which the chain of command will browbeat anybody who applies for a religious exemption into submission on the basis that their beliefs, their deeply held beliefs, are essentially ridiculous. Like everything about this is, here is how you deny a religious exemption on the basis of a deeply held belief. And I think that what the Padre, there's something the Padre's talking about how the chain of command has been approaching this, and I just there's a parallel between this and every other issue that the chain of command has ever addressed, and that it's that the chain of command is a hammer. Okay, they're just a bunch of hammerheads, and every problem looks like a nail. So every time somebody says something that sounds heretical to the latest revelations of the Nietzschean cult that is the chain of command at this moment in our history, they get treated as blasphemers and roasted on the gridiron of bureaucracy that is the CAF grievance process. And eventually 5F for that matter. So I can't help but think that there are a lot of parallels between what's going on right now in the Lutheran Reformation.
That's well spoken. That's very poetic. I don't believe I don't believe you can restate that as well. you got to listen to that back. I like that.
Okay, thanks. Sometimes I'm on my game. Today is not one of these days, believe it or not, but it comes out of nowhere. Lucky for me sometimes. But I'll go back to your grievance again there, James, because I really think this is educational for a lot of people out there. I've been through this process so many times myself, both as a griever and as an assisting member and as a sergeant major on the receiving end of that stuff. And
can I ask a quick question, though? It's sort of irrelevant, but slightly relevant. What can you tell what unit you were with, James, before?
All of this process happened. All of this happened while I was serving as a troop commander at the 1st Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery in Shiloh, Manitoba.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay, thanks. Good.
And I believe, I mean, all of this stuff is unclassified and it's my process as far as I'm concerned. So I think we also have a responsibility to say, quite frankly, who was involved in all of this, especially considering the fact that we're not going to be able to see it really easily here on this grievance, but I still have it. I have it all up here in the sense that the place or the region with the greatest amount of, no approvals, we'll say, is the whole Western region under three Can Div Commander Colonel Rutland, because as the L3 commander, he took it upon himself to process all of these requests, whereas, and I provided this in my grievance back up to Ottawa, that in all these other regions, the decision-making authority was given down to unit COs, where people probably had a closer relationship or a better chance of being approved. Mm-hmm. But of course, since it all had to filter much higher up to this one particular office in Edmonton, the Western region has the lowest approval rating of any in the country, which again, I point out to them, demonstrates that this is subject to the capricious whims of particular individuals and their subjective beliefs, to which the response is crickets. And if we may, Jeff, do you also have a tab on there for the decision letter from Brigadier General Awalt?
I do, yeah. You want to pull it up?
I would love, Padre, for you to get your thoughts on this response I was given. So right now, my grievance is actually still up at the CDS level.
You're gonna have to give me a summary, but I can't read it on my screen.
I'll read it to you. So the most important part is paragraph 18. So this is Brigadier General Awalt responding to my to my grievance and the arguments that we just kind of read out there from my grievance. So this is the Brigadier General's analysis. So he's answering the question: was the decision reasonable, fair, and justified? So he says, you contend that the response provided by the chain of command, specifically the 1 CMBG COVID-19 Accommodation Request Board, failed to meaningfully engage with or address any of the theological concepts which you provided to explain your religious beliefs. I note that the 1 CMBG chaplain was involved in the Accommodation Request Board and provided comment to the religious aspect of the accommodation request. In my de novo assessment, I sought advice from the acting 3 Canadian Div chaplain. I understand that while you clearly state and reference your sincerely held belief and cite Christian scriptures as supporting references, this remains a personal and subjective understanding of your own personal faith, not a statement or position that is rooted in a corporate religious authority. While the articles of faith that you reference may in fact be articles of your personal faith, there is no establishment that they are reflective of an organized religious group as a whole, short of belonging to the collect of Christian scriptures, in other words, the whole Bible. There is no extant documentation provided from an acknowledged religious group, organization, or theological tradition, again, besides the whole Bible, to support this request short of your own belief and interpretation, which I would argue is all that anybody has. Regarding religious harms that you believe are possible from the reception of the vaccine, there is no weight of evidence or corroboration from a religious authority that lends weight to that statement. While I understand from your representation that you object to this explanation, your subjective and personal interpretation of the scripture demonstrates a sincerely held belief of conscience, not an established religious belief upon which to approve religious accommodation. Hence, I find your request does not meet the threshold for religious accommodation.
Argumentum ad
Yeah.
verecundiam.
Yeah, well, that's why, everybody's an expert in religion, right? And that's how much people think religion and organized religion matter, right? It's just like, I think that what matters is the structure, the organized religion. They're thinking in very Roman Catholic or Islamic terms, or where you've got this hierarchy, just like the military, where if the Pope says it, it's that's the edict, right? The Pope says it, and you go along with it. And if you disagree with the Pope, then you're screwed. I mean, the Roman Catholics really have it worse, actually, than the rest of us, like Protestants, because we reject that system, right? Because we do emphasize the importance of the individual and how all of our teachings and beliefs, personal beliefs, subjective beliefs, need to be aligned with the Holy Scriptures. These guys who are the authors here are basically revealing their ignorance to the spectrum of denominations within Christianity. They've just adopted what they believe is the kind of one way you can view religion. And anyway, it's well written, as you know. You guys got a staff who's probably spent a week making sure it was all, eloquent. But bottom line is, he's saying, oh, well, you believe this as an individual, but most people in your church body don't. And so you don't matter, right? That's the layperson's version of this. I mean, that's you don't matter. Your Pope doesn't exist because you're Baptist, you're some Protestant group. So you don't have anything really defined. And so, they go with that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, you ought to be upset by it. And insulted. But I just wanted to say something from a pastoral point of view to you, James, to encourage you. We write this stuff and we keep writing it and we feel like it's going to go on deaf ears. And I write and I write and I write, and sometimes I want to stop writing. And my wife says to me, she's the best encourager to me in those moments. And she says, if one person reads it and they feel this guilty, okay, and they double, they rethink their thinking. One person, even if it's a corporal at a clerk level who's just been assigned, there's the James, here's another James correspondence. We're not going to all read, but you've got to read it. You one person, I'm tasking you to read it. You pray, right? That God's going to do something in their life, because individuals change the world. We know that, right? And that's the way we've got to approach this. I mean, that's what we've seen through what the miracles we've seen happen during the the resistance against the COVID nonsense, right? So I just want to say, James, like when you're writing all this stuff and you're getting this stuff back, I know what your nights are probably like and how frustrating it is because you're spending all this time on your own. These guys are doing it, getting paid a ton. They've got a whole staff behind it trying to outthink you. You know, they're laughing as they're doing it. You know, they're the guys in charge, right? They're all the sneaky peeky people, right? And you're the little David, right? And they're the big Goliath, but you know how that story goes, right? And I think the way we throw the stones is again that knowing that it's worth all the efforts because, you know, that's the right thing to do. You know, even if no one reads it, it's the right thing to do. And I just want to commend you for doing that, and everybody else is doing that. So I wanted to say that at some point in the topic. I know this is not here, but if I didn't say it here, I would have forgotten to say it at the end. So God bless you, brother, for doing what you're doing. But yes, I mean that when I read stuff like this, I mean it just my stomach, like I mean, I just get God have mercy, Lord have mercy on me, a sinner, right? Because it brings out the worst in me, right? To hear a response like this, right? It's irrational, it's cruel, it's implicitly insulting. Like you, man, like you value your troops. The only way you make the system work is by valuing each guy, each part of the system. A leader has no value unless the guy at the bottom, he sees unless the leader in some sense sees himself as a servant to the guy at the bottom, he is failing as a leader. Okay, that's maybe a Christian view of leadership, servant leadership. But I believe that any leader who thinks the guy at the bottom, even the janitor at the bottom, doesn't matter, has failed as a leader, and he's setting himself up for abuse. And I know you guys mean something to the CF when I look at your backgrounds and I know something about you guys. You guys have achieved a bunch of things, so that should add. But even if you didn't, every guy should matter. Responding that way to somebody, I mean, that's the kind of thing that makes you second guess whether you're nuts. Like my beliefs don't matter. I'm not a good Baptist, or I don't know what your denomination is. I'm not a good Pentecostal. Like
it's gaslighting.
Like if you look at the hierarchy of beliefs, okay, if you have a value, that value. So my value is treating people. I want to treat people good. That is, I know Jeff will disagree with me, but that is the psychologists who are secular will agree with me though. That is underpinned by a spiritual belief, a belief that people have value. Okay, so in some sense, that's faith when it talks about belief. So my argument is everybody has belief. I know, I just told you that, but I'll tell you, the secular psychologists, I can prove it because I've worked with them all through the CAF, would say that there are these the beliefs that underpin the values. The moment you mess with those beliefs and you challenge those beliefs, not in a way of challenging them going, you know, are they historical or verifiable, but challenging the fact that they matter, means you're actually on that trajectory of causing some kind of moral injury. The only thing that's going to save a guy like James from that is not only God and, you know, that, but other people that think like James, right? Because then you go, wait, I'm not alone in this. Well, look at how the system and how the elites have treated us in that sense. We don't want you to be around people that think like you, you know, so they're actually trying to make you weaker so you can't even stand on the beliefs that you have. So it's cruel at these really deep demonic levels that you know, even though it's couched in this, you know, militaristic, you know, admin language. So anyway, I'll just stop there. But anyway, but thanks for sharing that, James. And I'm glad you're getting through it, and you got a good face to you. You know?
Well, thank you so much for the encouragement, honestly. And to your point, though, too, like, yeah, it was, I knew the attempt was, well, this is all meant to be very discouraging and to make me stop writing back to Ottawa. That's also why my 5F release, even though it's an honorable discharge, says that it's due to personal and or domestic problems within my control, and that I'm an administrative burden to the CAF. This is the exact kind of administrative burden I've become, because after I got this pitiful response from the Brigadier General, I, of course, rejected his initial authority decision and sent it up to final authority, which is at this moment, my grievance is still sitting on the Chief of Defense Staff's desk, but I got an email a couple weeks ago letting me know that it's being assessed by an independent civilian organization, because in my response to this terrible argument that was given back to me, I told the Chief of Defense Staff himself, I said, "Sir, can you explain to me why Brigadier General Awalt has blatantly refused to address the glaring problem of his contradiction with our own policy? Because the DAOD on religious and spiritual accommodation says in black and white that the person's sincerely held personal belief does not need to conform to any established tradition or authority." And as we just went over in that paragraph here, the only thing that the general seems to be standing on is that my belief is not tied to an authority or a corporate authority that he recognizes, when our own policy says you never have to provide that. So what's going on here? And so that's why right now I'm waiting for the CDS to stop twiddling his thumbs on the issue.
I'll just throw in a couple of thoughts as to what's going on here and kind of reiterate what I stated there a minute ago about the military at this moment in our history functioning something like a Nietzschean cult. And I think that's true across the state at this particular moment in our history. The reference to the Inquisitions, to, like, say, the Second Crusades into the south of France to expunge the Cathar heresy in 15th century, I think. There are a lot of parallels here, because we're in a fourth turning according to Strauss-Howe generational theory, and the way through this thing. The thing is that our elites, as we keep calling them, are a generation at any given moment in our history. That's just kind of the way things work. People accumulate wealth and power throughout the course of our lifetime, and those of us who have been around longer tend to be higher to the top, or nearer to the top. And demographics indicate that at this particular moment in our history, the boomer generation is the generation of elites that's running our institutions, and they are the prophet generational archetype, which is the same generational archetype that would have prosecuted on behalf of the church the Reformation. When we're talking about Luther being burned at the stake for heresy, for leading the Reformation and stuff like that, I just want to emphasize that Luther was a nomad. He was a midlifer, and that is kind of the way we get to the next stage of the Enlightenment, is by following the midlife nomad when we enter these crises. Of course, what we have here is something like an article of faith in the state, in this one particular paragraph, where they're making the argument from authority in black and white. In a corporate religious authority, you need an authoritative body to tell you that this is true, not that you can infer the truth for yourself. And this is kind of what I see across the board in any kind of a complaints process in the CAF, is that the state is just and is right, and the chain of command, whatever they say goes, and anybody who expresses a concern over the way things are being run is a heretic and a blasphemer, and treated accordingly. And since I threw in a little bit of Latin there with the argumentum ad verecunditum, that's the argument from authority, which is a logical fallacy. Once again, we see there is a duty for decision makers to give reasons in accordance with the military administrative law manual. And of course, reasons are something that are things that are grounded in evidence and logic. And the CDS actually calls for decisions that are fully grounded in policy and doctrine. And as you're mentioning the DOAD, the reference to the DOAD on religious exemptions there, James, I'm reminded of so many times when I've gone back to, say, somebody I was assisting in a grievance process, when they get such a discouraging and disparaging kind of decision letter from the initial authority, which is the commanding officer, a lieutenant colonel, and they're like, I can't understand what they're doing here. It's just like everything is upside down, and I feel like I'm doing everything wrong, and I don't know what it is. And I'm reading it, and I just come back and I say, well, he didn't read the DOAD on grievances. That's what's happening. This guy didn't even read the DOAD. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if this decision maker who's writing this letter here didn't even so much as look at the DOAD on the religious exemptions before writing this. Not one bit, because that's kind of the way they roll in my experience. But I'll hand it back over to you there, James. Or sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say, and then over to James. I promise to be short. That the sloppiness amongst in the bureaucracy, you know, how all the COVID stuff just pushed through so fast, and everyone's saying we had no choice, right? Because it was this, you know, this plague, right? Everyone's dying left, right, and center, you know, like Zombieland or something, you know. So that was the justification to be sloppy at every level, right? I mean, this is just one facet to a larger problem, not military, but globally as well, where even still today, right, with the science, the narrative, you know, breaking down, and you're not hearing about it, you know. I mean, you're not, I mean, why isn't there more resistance? Why aren't there more Martin Luthers right now in the CF standing up? It's never too late, which is my point I wanted to make. So Martin Luther didn't get burned at the stake, and that was why the Reformation could advance and actually succeed. But what's interesting about Luther is I wouldn't say he was a nomad in the sense that he got away with what he got away because he sympathized with the people. So you could even say he's a bit of a Renaissance man, you know. I mean, people were already starting to think about, expressing their opinions on their own and all that kind of stuff, you know. So, which is promising because it basically says before Luther, everybody got burnt at the stake.
Did you not? Did I get that wrong? Sorry,
he was not killed.
Okay.
He was not burned at the stake. But he got away by historical accident because the Pope was busy fighting the Turks over in the with temporal wars and so forth, and so he didn't want to focus on the heretics because he just couldn't divide his energies, right? Yeah. But the point was, you know, there was sort of an ambiance of, we all know the Pope is corrupt. But every time somebody says something about it, they die, right? So Luther gets away with it, and then everyone's like pro-Lutheran. I mean, the whole Europe would have become Lutheran if the Pope didn't actually, you know, take the axe down with his inquisitions and so forth, and basically stop people from becoming Lutheran and princes and so forth, you know. So, but the nice thing about a guy like Luther is, you see, he succeeds because he actually already has the sympathies of the people. And what we found with the convoys, for instance, is you have this, you know, arguably the majority of Canadians sympathize with the fact that the government has been too harsh, at the very least, right? Has been too harsh in the way they've handled the COVID mandates, and they're not willing to admit it or change their ways. All right. I mean, you could even argue that the majority of Canadians are actually, you know, anti the way the government handled the mandates. You know, I mean, you could argue that, but at the very least, we could say that they were too harsh. You know, so why don't, again, and so that's why, again, I want to, you know, encourage people to be that voice in the wilderness, standing up, because you're actually not in the wilderness. There's a ton of support behind you. But what troubles me now, a guy talking from Africa, right? I've left, right? You know, I'm out of there, guys. I'm trying to support how I can, but I've left Canada, right? You know, but is that why aren't there more people now when it's actually easier to stand out? It's easier to, you know, deal with this stuff and vocalize, and there's more material. Why aren't these same people challenging these old briefing notes, right? These, you know, why aren't there more people stepping out of the military? Why aren't there more guys standing up behind James? You know, like, right? Maybe there are, maybe I don't know about them, but it's never too late. And a guy like Luther's a good example of that. So anyway, that's my thing.
And I just want to clarify one point there on the nomad. When I say that he was a nomad, that's a bit of a shorthand term for nomadic generational archetype in the theory of Strauss.
No,
theory.
Right.
Yeah, it's not a question of, you know, how nomadic he was per se personally, but it is the case, like in this pattern that we see repeat every 4 generations, where we go into these witch hunts. Which is what's happening. We see the prophet generational archetype, which is the generation that's born in the wake of the previous great crisis and doesn't go to war and comes up in an era of prosperity and regeneration and stuff like that. They're the generation that's indulged as children because it's all about the children, and all the children in the wake of the great crisis And so when they reach peak institutional power, in my read of the theory at least, there's a kind of a disconnect that they have amongst that generation because they don't have a large peer group that was driven into the meat grinder of history in a war. And so there's a kind of they're kind of out of touch in that respect. That's just what I'm seeing. I'm drawing on some of my own personal experience. But the nomad generation is the generation that comes up behind them. They're the generation that's raised as underprotected because they're raised while the prophet is off prosecuting the spiritual awakening in their early lives. Like we had latchkey kids in the 80s, and in the nomad generation that came previous, the one that fought the First World War, that was the lost generation. They were the newsies and the bootblacks and the coal miners as children in the early 20th century. And so the nomad is the midlifer that really kind of knows how to get things done and has a connection to real human suffering. Nomads from the previous fourth turning would have included Ernest Hemingway, Orwell, I'm not sure if Aldous Huxley was, but F. Scott Fitzgerald was, and the guys who served in the war, in the Great War, were the ones who became sort of they gave us the great literary achievements of the 20th century. And it is that insight, I think, gained from having gone through one of these wars. And the First World War is one of those ones that everybody has a sense was kind of pointless, and nobody really fully understands how we got there. But it's because the prophet generation is at peak political power in their midlives around these times. And so the nomad generation ends up fighting wars like the Afghanistan War and the First World War, while the prophets are at peak political power, and come away with a sense that it really was kind of pointless, and what was it all for? And when they're at peak institutional power and they're beating the drums for another great war, as in a world war, we're kind of the ones who stand up, like Luther stood up and said, well, wait a minute, no, you can't treat people like this. This is wrong. And I think they have, and there are a lot of parallels with Jesus as well. They know not what they do. And whatever you do unto your fellow men, you do unto me. I think that was kind of the great revolution of Jesus, who was also a midlifer, who stood up to his elders, corrupt Sanhedrin, way back in the day. And he throws the stone back to them and says, let he who is without sin cast the first stone, because the truth is that the prophet is probably the most adulterous generation in their early lives, if the Harvard Statistical Database is to be relied upon for this particular curriculum. So yeah, it's a much broader picture than that. There's this cycle that I'm making reference to. It's not so much that Luther himself roamed the earth personally. It's that he belongs to a generation that has to come up behind the prophet generation. And he has a peer group that probably suffered greatly in some of the wars and well, I guess crusades that they would have prosecuted around that time. And when they reach their midlives, and they kind of stand up and say, well, wait a minute, we can't keep going down this path anymore. This is wrong, and it's dehumanizing.
I mean, I just mean to say that
Sure.
these movers and shakers in history are often perceived as these radical, they're these individualists who are by themselves. And my point is that it's not quite that simple. There's already a support. There's a worldview there. There's other people there. You can't get away with it unless there isn't, which is what's really promising when we look at what we're going through, right? Because we're being told we're this, you're the only one. James is the only one, right?
Yeah.
Or Jeff, you're the only one. And it's like, and that's what they want you to believe, because those guys, you can't succeed, right? I mean, unless you are like Jesus Christ, you can't just succeed as the only one. But what's promising, gives us hope, is that we actually aren't. And what was really cool about the convoys is we were able to see we weren't really the only ones. That was what was so beautiful about it, right? Because everyone was like, I thought I was the only one, and I'm not. And there was power in that. There's energy there, right? There was power in those numbers as people stood together and recognize that. And I just mean that in terms of Luther, not. So thanks for clarifying the nomad thing. I'm just saying that's what I mean about the significance of Luther with this, that we can all be that guy, recognizing you're basically the mouthpiece for a bunch of other people that aren't as courageous as you are. I'm not going to say that's okay, but it's understandable. And once you start talking, right, there's going to be more of those mouthpieces that come behind you. Why more of that's not happening right now is kind of disturbing me, But anyway, maybe it's going to start happening in the fall or whatever. But anyway,
Well, according to the
but
theory, we're not due to come out of this before 2026. It's 2026 to 2030 is what they're forecasting, and those line up really well with presidential elections in the United States. So.
But don't you think the more lockdowns are happening, right? Coming up this fall, we think more lockdowns, right? So hopefully there's more aggravation to guys that are like friends of James, right? I mean, your friends that are still in. Hopefully they're going to sit there and go, you know what? Enough. I didn't do enough for James, 6 months ago, but you know what? Now I'm sick of this, right? Like I'm hoping that's what happens, in the fall. What do you think?
Yeah.
And I'm hoping too, it's always good, of course, to get encouragement and to have this real sense that the things that I'm doing and folks like myself are doing actually matter and are having an impact. And I've heard on good authority, for instance, from folks that I am still in contact with back in Shiloh, that my initial announcement video and perhaps some other ones are making their rounds amongst the troops, probably to the chagrin or disdain of the higher ups in that chain of command. But I was even told that there were some new troops from the artillery school in Gagetown who had shown up for their first regimental posting in Shiloh, saying, "Hey, have you heard about these videos this guy Captain Formosa was making?" And they got to hear from my former troops, like, "Yeah, he used to be our troop commander. He used to work here." And they're like, "Oh wow, no way!" So apparently, this stuff that's happening is already making the rounds across CAF bases in the country. And I'd like to say I thank everybody for watching and their encouragement, and I foresee that the sort of things that we're doing, especially something like this right now, is going to gain even more traction, especially as we can probably anticipate, like you say, in the fall. There's going to be more things that, again, really like butt heads up against people's consciences and their conception of how we ought to be doing things around here. And it'll be compelling a lot of them to ask more pointed and directed questions at their chain of command. And I would even encourage those folks. It's something that I haven't made as a deliberate move yet on my channels or through here with Veterans for Freedom. But I can tell that, again, and as Jeff mentioned, there's a lot of problems with with feeling like you're sort of homeless with your chain of command because nobody will listen to you. And they might even say that the process, like going to the ombudsman, is a waste of time. So I would encourage those folks, if you're still serving in the military and they don't know where to turn or who they can make their grievances known to, or to get more exposure on that, definitely reach out to us at Veterans for Freedom. Email me at james@veteransforfreedom.ca if you're still in the forces and you're going through this same or something similar to this sort of religious persecution that I experienced on my way out. Because even if I understood, like, you could tell I had to play a long game here, and I was only able to be so open about all this stuff after I was released in early July this year. But I'd been essentially railing against the system for over a year, even before this policy became a mandate. I was already writing lengthy letters to my personal boss at the time, the battery commander, explaining how we were setting ourselves up for horrific segregation and discrimination by doing what we were doing. And of course, the response I received from those kind of folks was something akin to, I should look at myself in the mirror and consider whether or not I deserve to wear that uniform, and I should reread my commissioning scroll, along with vague threats of how I was going to be very soon disciplined in the future. Of course, those disciplinary measures never happened to materialize out of their tantrums. But I refuse to name those certain individuals because they know who they are, and so does everybody else back at the regiment, and they're going to have a hell of a time as it is.
Yeah, is it safe to say too, you're basically inviting people to get a hold of you who are going through something similar, right? But why religious persecution, any persecution on this matter?
Yes.
I think you'd be a good guy to talk to, right? Because of this whole conscience thing, right? And the whole all the stuff that you've been suffering. I found with guys not wanting to join Veterans for Freedom is this fear, right? They're saying, Padre or Harold, if I do that, I'm going to lose my pension, or people are going to find out who I am, or because of what you just said, right? They've said, they've intimidated you saying, hey, man, Captain Formosa, if you keep going down this hole, you're going to lose this, you're going to lose that. It's totally illegal. It's totally bullying, but yet it's COVID, right? So anything goes, right? So what do you say to people out there who are, not sure if they want to make that move and get a hold of you? Because, and maybe Jeff can say something to this too,
Yep.
because they're frankly afraid of their chains. You know what I mean? Like, as an ad for Veterans for Freedom. But I mean, I was never afraid to join this, this thing, even though I'm retired. But I mean, it's crazy to think how many people are terrified of talking to you guys, right?
Right. And we do have people reaching out to us, and I have a couple of friends who are back there. One of them is making the religious exemption argument on the stem cell basis. And he seems to have gotten traction out of that from his local chain of command, but when he gets posted, that's another matter. So he'll probably have to go through it all again. And this is one of the references that I flipped him. Another one was the guidance to initial authorities on administration of grievances. And what I think really matters here, guys, when you're fighting these big shots, I guess, like they think they're big shots, but they're actually quite inept, and they don't seem to understand that real answers exist, and they have to go looking for them. So here is the administrative law manual for the CAF. It's pretty extensive, but I just wanted to highlight this one section right here: procedural fairness in the CF. It's CAF now, but whatever. And these are really important principles. I pull these up all the time when I'm talking about grievances. Reasonable apprehension of bias on the part of the decision maker. You think you can make an argument from that, and there's all this other stuff about disclosure, the duty to give reasons that I mentioned there before, standard of proof for decision makers. So what's really going to pay off when you're fighting the whites like this is if you know their jobs, because they don't. And that's the dirty little secret in the CAF, is they're all just making it up as they go along. They've been building that DOAD database and transferring the CFAOs over into it. It's the administrative orders that govern us sort of on a daily basis, I guess, lowest level. And they've been transferring those CFAOs into DOADs my entire career, since before I ever got in, and it's still not done. So that's what you're up against, folks. Okay. And I'll just do a quick scroll down here to 2.8. Oh, maybe not too far. 2-8, 2-9, right to make representations, reasonable apprehension of bias. Procedural unfairness cannot occur if the decision maker has a predetermined or biased disposition towards the issue or individual. The decision maker who has a personal or financial interest in a matter under consideration might also be reasonably perceived as having a real or apprehended bias. There cannot be either a real bias on the part of the decision maker or a reasonable apprehension of the bias on the part of the decision maker. So then they get into a little bit about the standards for law and everything. The apprehension of bias must be a reasonable one, held by a reasonably minded persons, applying themselves to the question and obtaining thereon the required information. That that test is: what would an informed person viewing the matter realistically and practically and having thought the matter through conclude? Would he think that it is more likely than not that the decision maker, whether consciously or unconsciously, would decide fairly? And that would he think that it is more reasonable than not is kind of another reference to a reasonable person test. It's the not just the reasonable person test either, but it's what they call a balance of probabilities in Canada, a preponderance of the evidence. I think in the United States, it's basically a 51% chance that a bias exists. So that's the standard that you have to meet in order to get this thing pushed to the next level, which would be the final authority, which is the Chief of Defense Staff. And if you're not happy that he met his requirement to give you a reasonable decision, then you can apply to have it reviewed. You can apply for judicial review by a federal court. It costs you $50, and that court will rule as to whether that decision was fully policy compliant and conformant with the generally accepted practices of administrative law in Canada. There's another one I wanted to point out, which is the duty to give reasons. The application of procedural fairness, because the decision maker has a duty in this process to explain himself. He has to be able to explain why he's making this decision, and I know I'm using some phallocentric language there. Pardon me, ladies. It could very well be female as well, and it has been in my case. An examination of the relevant case law also establishes the principle that reasons for a decision must be given to the affected individual. Reasons, it has been argued, foster better decision-making by ensuring that issues and reasoning are well articulated and therefore more carefully thought out. The process of writing reasons for a decision by itself may be a guarantee of a better decision. Reasons also allow parties to see that the applicable issues have been carefully considered and are invaluable if a decision is to be appealed, questioned, or considered on judicial review. And so that's what you do, is you just kind of look for the holes in their arguments, like that first paragraph that we pointed to that I said was an argument from authority, which is a logical fallacy, and that is not a reasonable decision, because that's not a good reason, right? If it's not logical, then it's not a good reason. And it goes on to say that the duty to give reasons will only be satisfied when the reasons are adequate. The existence of an adequate written decision, where appropriate, facilitates the review of a decision by a higher level authorities in the chain of command, particularly if a grievance is submitted. So they're really, they're presenting this from the perspective of the chain of command, and how they should set the chain of command up for success in denying grievances. But the flip side to that is that in order to deny your grievance, they have to give you a logical, coherent reason that is fully grounded in law and policy as per the CDS's expectations, stated in another reference that I don't have pulled up right now, but you guys get the idea, okay? These guys, their jobs and how they have to respond to these grievances is very well articulated in policy, and it's all out there somewhere. And if you reach out to the guys at Veterans for Freedom, we've all been here before, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that we all want to be engaged with, because this is near and dear to our hearts. We've all been there with when you're the only one and you're isolated, and the chain of command is you got the full weight of the institution coming down on you. Like, it's a really it's a very strong feeling of vulnerability, and we understand that. So feel free to reach out to us. But that's my rant, guys. I'm going to pass that back over to James, because I think we were on
so what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what I think you're saying is that they did nothing of the sort whatsoever in my case, which I think is readily apparent to anybody that's been following along with us here. And again, to some of the main thrusts of my argument here, I posted the link there in the chat by the side there of the DAOD. If we could bring that up for a moment to show the specific DAOD that I've been endlessly bringing up here. If we can screen share it, there's a specific section that I'd like to show everyone, which essentially proves my point that
whether I can actually click on the link is another matter.
I think I might be able to share it myself, actually.
Yeah, go ahead, James.
Let's see here.
I'll get rid of my share, and I think you can share it. We haven't actually attempted this yet, so
there we go.
There you go.
So this is the exact specific reference that I was making, which, again, I'm incredibly curious to see how the Chief of Defense Staff deals with this, when I called out Brigadier General Awalt by saying to the CDS, "Sir, can you please explain to me why Brigadier General Awalt refused to address my challenge, saying that he was contradicting the DAOD, which says right here that the belief or practice of a person does not have to be a fundamental tenet or article of faith," although I'd obviously argue that mine is, "nor does it have to be required by any official religious dogma or conform with the position of any religious official or spiritual leader." Yet that is singularly the only argument that they've clearly ever given here at my initial authority response, saying that, well, my beliefs don't matter because they don't conform to the position of a religious official or spiritual leader. But the DAOD says I don't have to do that. So I'm very curious to see what the CDS has to say about that. And I wonder how long he's going to continue to sit on this issue and not provide me a response.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath. I'll tell you that much. I have literally the one grievance that I filed over a PER score was it turned out to be irrelevant because I was literally like going to my promotion parade the following day after I got the decision letter. They said, "Yeah, you were right about everything, and here's everything you asked for." and then it was like, "Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm already promoted." So,
but you continue to return to this idea of, here we have a sincerely held belief, a sincerely held religious belief. It doesn't need to be connected to an organized religion, right? We keep returning to that. That's originally what this thing was. This creature of sincerely held belief wasn't a sincerely held religious belief wasn't intended to be something that people who were already deeply grounded in their religions had as a support. Okay, it was for sincerely held belief was for people who were not connected to a religion to have something they could stand on to support their own conscience, right? I mean, this is kind of a constant theme we're seeing here with even with this podcast. What's interesting with what you're showing here in this document is this is the same issue going on in the universities. It's the same issue going on in the hospitals and the post offices. I know I've got friends in all those tons of different, milieus where they're saying the same thing to me. They're saying, "Father, pastor, I'm getting rejected, even though my church is saying, we're not sure about this vaccine or whatever. It's not enough, because as soon as my church doesn't feel 100% behind my sincerely held belief, unless my church is 100% backing up my sincerely held belief, meaning unless everyone in my church body doesn't believe exactly like I believe, my individual sincerely held belief doesn't count in spite of scripture or whatever." I think that's what's when you're saying how are they going to respond, it's pretty hard not to see a larger umbrella, again, to return to this idea of the elites, right? That whatever is being disseminated to our CDS and telling him this is how you need to respond to guys like James, it's the same people, right? It's the same processes that are operating in the hospitals. And I mean, there's nothing different here. That's why Veterans for Freedom has become this sort of, popular organization to people who aren't veterans, right? You guys know that, right? Because this is resonating with people everywhere. So, I mean, I suspect that what's the answer? Well, they're just going to avoid it and say, well, you don't matter. And, just, the crickets thing or whatever. And I guess they can, because, when COVID's over, whatever that means, people are going to look back and they're going to say, well, it was the COVID time. We were kind of allowed to do anything we wanted, we were given permission, bylaw officers were given permission to abuse their powers and to, do what they, people at, Starbucks were given permission to say, well, you can't use our bathroom, but you can, or you guys know what I'm talking about. So, I mean,
I've had both of those experiences.
Well, yeah, but it's still worth it for you, James, to do the work. And I just want to say what I think was you just raised something earlier about naming people. You're very gentlemanly in saying, I'm not going to name these people, but I am going to name these people. And that's really, really quite professional, because these guys who are making decisions like this and they're signing their position to it, there's no reason why you can't name them and sign their, to name them out to it, because that's how you're going to really hit their hearts. Because all these guys, all the way through this, they're just passing it up to the technocrats and the bureaucrats, and they're saying, well, we're just following the chain. But the moment you're able to say, no, man, you're accountable one day, whether it be before God or the rest of your life, hopefully feeling guilty about the bad decisions and the abuse you've made, whatever it is, you've got to live with yourself. I mean, this is PTSD material again, right? People that go against what they know to be right, and so you're actually doing them a favor by naming them, not the guys that are doing the, bad mouthing you in the hallways or whatever, James, and, telling you, you don't matter. Not those guys, but the guys that are, the chain of command guys that are taking the time to write you back. And that's the advice I've given to people in the universities and hospitals and so forth. You find out who's written it, and you keep them accountable. So when they have these bureaus at the college saying, well, the COVID, target, the COVID special interest group, they've made this decision on this religious stuff. What I'm advising is saying, in your response to them, as you grieve that in that context, is say, who are these people? I want to know your positions. I want to know your names. I want to know your context. I'm entitled to know that stuff about you, because it puts us on the same playing field, right? It takes them away from this faceless, again, the inquisitors, right? The Inquisition. How did they do it? They would mask themselves up, right? Like the hangman, the guy that executed people, right? He's masked up because you want him to be impersonal. The moment that you see his face, it changes the dynamics. Like the moment you see the guy hanging you, that he's an individual, and you go eye to eye with him, it changes things for better or for worse, right? And so I think that's a really helpful strategy in terms of all this documentation, Jeff, that you're giving and showing the law and all that kind of stuff. Is as you approach this stuff and you grieve it, finding mechanisms or places or ways, right, or facets where you can actually say, you can input and say, I'm kind of going to keep this guy accountable, this guy with a first and last name, and not just a position number or a position, but that position counts too, right? Going after the individual, not in I'm going after him, I'm going to blow up your house, but keeping him accountable or her accountable. Because without that, the system's got us already, right? The bureaucracy and the technocracy, but we still have good people within that bureaucracy and technocracy that you can kind of pull at their heartstrings and make a difference.
Yeah, and I guess I would just add that at this moment in our history, like I said, it's a generation that's running the institutions right now, and that's the boomer generation. And in my own experience, in kind of twisting their arms to do the right thing over the easy thing throughout the course of my 20-year career, it's really all about. I think you really touched on something there about naming names, because just for what it's worth, in my own personal experience, it's all about looking good with those guys at the top, and they're just kind of chasing all the fluffy headlines, and the modus operandi is scapegoating, just like they did to Kyle Brown in Somalia when he ended up being the only one to go to prison over the whole affair, even though he was the one who gave us the pictures and showed us all what they were really up to over there. He suffers with PTSD now, and he's doing better, but he has had a very troubled life in the time since then. As a matter of fact, I believe he even grew up in a foster home and joined in multiple foster homes, and joined the military kind of looking for that community, and what ended up happening. But they abused him spiritually and ethically by coercing him into participating in the torture and murder of the Somalian boy that he was sent there to help. But somehow, he was the one with the least amount of time in the military in the whole affair, and he somehow knew that what they did over there was wrong over everybody else. And for coming forward, he ended up paying a price, and it is a terribly morally injurious experience to have to go through. I can tell you that. And so I think that people's spirituality and this knowledge too, that the doing the right thing is never easy, so if you're finding it incredibly hard, then that's probably a pretty good indication that you're over the target. It's really about optics, guys. I've been saying it's an optics war. They're trying to control all the optics despite the outcomes, so that they can come out looking like the good guys and all of this, and just don't let them have that. Be candid. I advocate for radical candor. It's all about that thing that you stop short of saying because you're worried of the kind of emotional impact that it's going to have. Like, you don't need to be needlessly cruel. That's not what I'm saying, but just go ahead and say that. Say the harsh truth, and what you will find is that it really kind of puts them on their heels, and they'll say that you're not supposed to say it like that, and things like that. And but you just let them know how it really looks to you, and that's the kind of thing that'll make them stop in their tracks. And I think James is doing a pretty good job of that here in his grievance that I have here up on the screen. Did you want to throw back to that at all, James? Or
if we could just take a look, I don't know if there's anything that follows from that last section there that maybe fills out some more information, but I will say I avoided even getting down that rabbit hole, as it were, of trying to produce some sort of corporate religious authority in response. I found it much easier for my case to, again, just sort of throw our own rules and regulations back at them,
100%.
because I would hazard to argue that even if I did find, for instance, if I had a recognizable, like a church with an address, and every single member of the congregation and all of the spiritual leaders were all 150% behind me and in support of me, what would that do to stop the chain of command from just saying, well, we have decided in our infinite wisdom to not recognize the authority of that particular group because we don't want to, really.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, rather than play that game, I wanted to show to everyone that we shouldn't have been playing these kinds of dirty trick games in the first place.
That's exactly what they are.
Well, and that's actually what's happening with the whole push right now in terms of the woke agenda of getting rid of chaplains and discrediting religions that as being hateful, conducting religions because basically they stand up for good old-fashioned values and belief systems. My own body being one of them, right? So, if you say your belief is the only way, or you've got issues with homosexuality, not that it changes your work conditions or your work relations, right? I mean that you believe it's sinful because that's your belief from the scriptures and from history or from biology or science, but it's part of your tenets of your faith, or abortion, or whatever, and the woke stuff is saying we're coming after you, and they don't want to recruit right now. They won't recruit chaplains into those denominations, so you just fizzle them out, right? So they're not you put up with them for the next 10 years until they retire out, or 20 years, and then you're free from them. But I mean, what does that mean in the future? So there is sort of this. It's a good point you make about the corporate thing, saying even if you have that corporate, you've got a pope who stands there saying, hey, no, we think that taking that injection is a sin, and I don't want any of my members to take it. Yeah, what is the response? Oh, yes, sir. We value religion now. No, it's going to be, well, let's find a way to discredit that and to get rid of them as a player in this larger system. And so anyway, it's already happening in terms of a larger, grander scheme. And that's why I think that when you're standing up for, it's not just standing up for this. It's not just this, this is a microcosm of something much larger. So what you're fighting for, James, is iconic of a larger battle, and that's why you can't give in. But it's also, I think, useful for you to make those tie-ins when you're doing these separate podcasts that you're doing, these little videos, to put these, tie it in with the bigger, the larger global picture, especially as the media narrative is crumbling. I think because you've got the credibility, people know who you are. And I mean, it's clear, it's obvious. It's no longer a conspiracy theory. Remember the assessment grid? There's something fascinating about that assessment grid the chaplains were using. There's one point where they actually say, and if you can't really fall back on anything else, if the church body is saying something that science doesn't agree with, well, it's just sort of conspiracy theory, right? So that then you can discredit it for that reason. It says something like that in that assessment grill, right? Well, they would have to majorly revise that today if they were doing it for the next boosters or whatever, so you actually have things at your fingertip, new ammunition that's actually quite powerful. So I would encourage you to even go further and not just focus on your grievance, but say, my grievance means more than just like my job. I mean, this is really opening something. Like look at these facets, pull from a lot of stuff Jeff said, and maybe, some things I've said in terms of the hospitals and the, all these other places, colleges, universities, they're all struggling with the same thing. So there are these common threads, it's not just a military phenomenon. We know that, but I think there's a ton of people out there that are so focused on their own lives and they're so ticked off at their military chains that they don't see the bigger picture. And when they see the bigger picture, that can inspire them to say, I'm doing more than just serving myself here. It's not just about me and saying, I've got a right in my chain to do this, right? My chain of command better answer me because I've, my DOAD tells me this or the CFAO tells me that. But no, as a human being fighting for the greater cause, I'm obliged to stand up, this fall, right? Even if it means I might lose my job, because it really, we are in a bizarre phase of history and it matters. So anyway, I think it's inspiring what you're doing, but I think just the intelligence that you demonstrate, go further, use that creative energy, right? And the Word of God and the Holy Spirit there too, to make those further tie-ins. I'd love to, and send me the links to that stuff, because I haven't heard anything you've done before, James, except something I saw in the news once, I think. One clip once from you. And then I've seen some stuff of yours, Jeff, but I mean, not that much. So if people send me links, I read it, then I listen to them.
I was going to say, I think a good initiative for V4F to undertake would be to build something like a SharePoint site that people can go to and download some helpful references and things like that, and put some guides together. Like I even did that stuff when I was in the military, when I was a sergeant major. I mean, I distributed a template that people could follow to grieve their PERs and things like that. So I still have all that stuff, and I'd be more than happy to put it up there for anybody to use, even my own grievances, if you want to get some kind of an idea of the kind of wordsmithing that really counts. Then I'm an open book. I can stand by my words, and I think, like you said, these guys should be able to too. And there's nothing wrong with putting people's signatures blocks up there under the words that they endorse. So that's how we win. It's about the optics, and it's about making them look bad, not in the sense that we're defamatory, but just showing them for what they really are. But from their perspective, they would see it as making them look bad. And that's what really hurts them. You got to hit them in the optics. Yeah, I mean, good on James for taking this on, and good on anybody who's still out there fighting this fight. It takes a lot of courage, and even in the defense ethics statement, within that framework, they define courage essentially as punching up. It really is about following the example, I think, of Kyle Brown in Somalia. And despite the fact that he was overwhelmed by the chain of command, bringing down the full weight of the institution on him to make him believe that he was not a good soldier for going against the chain of command, he still was able to marshal the courage to do the right thing, despite the personal consequences in that situation. And that really is what courage is all about. It's standing up to bullies, right? And that's really what modern Western militaries are here to do. So it really flies in the face, I think, of a lot of deeply held beliefs. Not only for those of us who are ethically minded, those of us who are spiritual and religious, but even those of us who sign up to serve, because it's like I said, I mean, from my perspective, not really holding some of the more literally spiritual beliefs. Joining the military had a real appeal to me for the prospect of perhaps giving some little heretic in a land that I never cared about the chance that I had growing up here in Canada. Carl Sagan gave me a really deep appreciation for the kinds of oppression that people that are similarly minded to me have faced throughout the course of their history. So it had a real appeal for that sake. And now they're going against everything that we supposedly stand for, the highest ethical principle under that defense ethics framework being respect the dignity of all persons. And here they are forcing an experimental injection on people as if their humanity is inconsequential, and essentially relegates them to the status of lab rats with respect to their dignity. So it really is important that I think that we turn the doctrine of the Canadian Armed Forces, the policy that guides the decision makers, as well as, more broadly in the broader fight that we're talking about, the fight for basic principles. We got to start throwing these human rights complaints back at the institution. We got to take them on in the charter challenges, and it's going to take more voices in the choir and more people standing up, and following the example that James is setting for us here. So yeah, I would encourage anybody to get in touch with us if they're looking for guidance from the people who've been through the process before. It's going to take a team effort, and that's exactly the kind of thing that I think Veterans for Freedom exists to be a focal point for. But anyway, I'll throw it back to you guys there to maybe give us a little bit of your take on what people can do to get started, if they haven't already, in taking on this fight in the ideological battle space. Padre, do you want to take that one first?
Well, if people, at the very least, everybody can, read like Defense Code of Ethics, right? I mean, you make an excellent point. Okay, dignity of all people, right? Courage, authenticity, integrity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, why are we punishing guys that are so clearly displaying those things? And again, if this was an uninformed conscience, in the sense of saying, okay, guys, we are, we're parade is at 10 o'clock, and you get James saying, well, no, that's against my conscience to go at 10 because, my workout routine works this way, and 10:30, you know what I mean? Like one of those foolish, silly, I'm gonna rely on some religious belief or some internal feeling or something as a way of kind of controlling or usurping the power of my legitimate authorities, right? But it's clearly not that, right? The world has seen, right, that this thing is legitimately controversial. The vaccine is legitimately controversial. So we're at a point of history right now that any intelligent human being who hasn't read up on this stuff, it's despicable. So I think at the very least, if we're talking to military members, I'm not pretending that's who we're talking to in terms of your question, to read the stuff that you're seeing here on the screen that Jeff's provided for. Look at the DODs if you don't believe it.
That's right.
Read, look at whatever's there, click the links, and then influence at your level. And if you're not willing to put in your own grievance, or you're going to get the next booster because you actually don't have a big problem with it, I personally think you should. I think everybody should. But anyway, if you don't, at least talk about this stuff with people, or say, hey, you know what? These guys like James Topp, I think they really have a point. Like that guy getting court-martialed on that. Like, really, guys? Bring this stuff up. Break the silence. I mean, everybody can do that, and that might have an impact on your PR or something like that, but it's not going to get you fired. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's a level, different people are courageous at different levels. You guys obviously are the kind of people that are always kind of courageous, who are out in the front line. I mean, you're the kind of guys that I, as a Padre, want to serve when I'm in Iraq, all right? Because you're going to take the bullet for me, right? You're going to say, Padre, get out of the way, and stop standing there on the hill without any body armor on, right? And you're going to jump out, right, and do that. But not everyone's willing to do that, right? So I'm talking to those guys who know they're not willing to do that, but they can still do something. So I think if that's the last thing I say for the podcast, because I think that's what you're saying is or maybe not, is your last words or whatever. Well, I want those to be the last words. Nobody has a reason right now, okay, in the military, to do nothing. Right? You do something.
It's
and if
you're
yes, and that doesn't mean for the religious people like us out there praying. I mean, that's a no-brainer. You pray, but I'm talking about, you say something, you start a conversation, you defend guys like this that you're not willing to do the same thing. but you defend them. And I mean, we start changing this thing. It's not too late. You think the woke thing, guys walking around with their, with the absurdity of what's going on in the CF, you think that stuff's gonna last? Like that stuff's not gonna last, right? So I mean, here you got an opportunity to do something, but well, time will tell, So that's, I guess that would be my words of advice. And I don't know if that's what you're fishing for, Jeff, but
Well, I
anyway.
think that's exactly it, and I think like you touched on a lot of stuff there, but I'll just kind of throw back to what we were talking about before there with the parallels with Luther. I mean, this is the human story. This is how we've struggled to overcome, I guess, the what Darwin might have called the lowly stamps of our origins. At least from my perspective, anyway. I think that it's basically the case that theocracy is the default setting for the human species. And that's what we have right now, is we have a kind of postmodernist theocracy that's running things behind the scenes. And the new theocracy is calling for our spiritual purity and our fealty, and insufficient fealty makes you the target of the witch hunt. And so it's the same struggle, I think, over and over and over again. And this is just our time. And so it really does kind of come down to the question of whether you're on the side of good or whether you're on the side of evil here. So perhaps some folks in the Christian sphere could take a lesson from the example set by Jesus, like I said, of standing up to those in authority and saying, no, there is only one way, and the problem is all of you, all of the little guys around here, and you're the ones who need to bleed for this cause. And yeah, I think that what's kind of happening is we have the case once again of a midlifer generation that's standing up to an elder generation, ushering in the new theocracy and kind of dragging us back to the hell that we've strived over the millennia to emancipate ourselves from. But yeah, I hope I'm not taking too much liberty with my interpretation of the story of Jesus there. But I do think it's a very Christian thing to do, to the service of the downtrodden, the service to your fellow humans. And that's whose side you should be on right now. Okay, it's not the establishment and the powerful that you should be teaming up with in the witch hunt. That's a very cowardly thing to do, in my opinion. I mean, you feel safety in your numbers now, but one day that mob will come for you too. So the courage is all about being on the side of the little guy and protecting people. And that's really what it's coming down to right now, is something so fundamental as that. But again, this is you're the guests here, so I'll throw it back over to James and let him get his piece in there.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody, especially if you're still serving and you're listening to something like this, if there's any bit of our training that you should really take to heart, is really incorporate our bystander training. We've all gone through that annual brief where you're told the behavior that you're willing to walk past and say nothing about is the behaviors that you're willing to accept. And I know for a fact that there's a lot of troops back at my regiment and across the country that are clearly witnessing things that they don't agree with and that they have severe personal ethical issues with. And you have a duty and a responsibility to speak your mind and to speak up to your chain of command about these issues, and to not be like, again, some of these folks who I won't name, but they know who they are for a fact when bringing up things like this, bringing up duty with honor and the CAF code of ethics, and saying how denying my conscience is inherently not respecting my dignity as a person and dehumanizing me, and that courage is not only physical but in a moral space in terms of doing what is required even when it's not a popular thought or opinion. Similarly, don't behave like some of the battery commanders at the 1st Regiment, where when they were provided with, for instance, a binder about this thick or so that contained nothing but peer-reviewed scientific journals, product monographs, patent histories, that sort of hard data that you would expect, and the response that we were given when we said to said unnamed battery commander, "Sir, this is what concerns us. This is why we believe this is a manifestly unlawful order," that it was received by this major who saw the binder, didn't open or read any of the documents, and said, "Huh, well, I believe that it is a lawful order, so that makes it a lot easier for me because I don't have to think about it."
Right.
That was literally the response I received from a battery commander, that it's easier for him because he doesn't have to think about it. And sorry, not to rag too much on RMC, but I can't help myself from doing it sometimes. But a lot of these folks, they're brought up in the institution with this idea that if you're especially an officer, we're paying you the big bucks for your brain, for your mind, and the thing that sets you apart and makes you so special, and dare they say it, God's gift to the military, as it were, is because we're paying you for your capacity to think and make decisions, especially in a life or death context where it matters the most, and the consequences to those thoughts and decisions of yours have the greatest import. So don't be like these behaviors that we all shouldn't be walking past and not calling out. If you see something, say something. And if you're not getting any joy whatsoever within an institution that is demonstrating these kinds of levels of internalized corruption, reach out to Veterans for Freedom, reach out at our emails, engage with this kind of material, and feel free to speak your mind, share this information, share these videos amongst your peers. And if it inspires further challenges or questions that you think deserve valid answers with proper reasoning from the chain of command, give them those arguments, and do not stop until you are given a satisfactory answer. And if you're not, that's also, again, why it's a great avenue to reach out to us, and we will make these grievances of yours much better known to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, as you can tell, we're warriors around here. So we're in it for the fight. I always found that there was some irony in just constantly being advised that I need to pick my battles. I'm like, we're in a profession that is entirely defined by the fact that we literally do not pick our battles. You touched on a couple of things there, James, that I think are pretty good words to live by. If you see something, say something. I've been hearing that from the chain of command for years and years. And it's like the fact of the matter, I think, as far as I'm able to observe from their behaviors, is when they say that, they mean if you see somebody of a lower rank doing something, say something. But if you see somebody of a higher rank, then don't. The great irony here that I think there is a broader picture that may be lost on a lot of people too, since we're talking about the defense ethics framework and how it even explicitly states that, courage is not really about simply following orders. I mean, it's explicitly said in the ethics program that simply following orders is not sufficient to satisfy your duty. You have a duty to ensure that your orders are lawful and ethical. And when it comes to the ethical piece, it is a higher standard because an order can be lawful and still unethical. We mentioned the respecting the dignity of all persons being the highest ethical principle under that framework, and how that's just being kind of trampled all over right now. But the bigger picture is that defense ethics program came out of the wake of the Somalia affair back in 1993 when they did the report in 95. That was one of the recommendations that they gave. They said that they were failing to inculcate an ethical culture in the CAF, which sounds way too familiar to anybody who's read Marie Deschamps' report on sexual misconduct in the CAF in 2015. But that defense ethics program was something that was given to the boomer generation as a result of what they did in Somalia. And now they are the generation that's at peak institutional power. And as you can see, they're flagrantly disregarding a lot of their own doctrine as it is, and failing to practice what they preach, simply following orders, because that's the easy way and not the right way. And doing the right thing is never easy. Anyway, I could probably rant for quite a while on that one. But I really appreciate everything that you guys have said here today. I think it speaks to my own experience quite a bit, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels that way. It really is going to take, I think, a lot of voices in the choir to really wake up those sleepy folks who still remain. Thanks for joining me in that choir, guys. I like that it's such a diverse conversation ecosystem that we have here at V4F, because I think that's something of a stereotype that we need to overcome, that we're all just a bunch of singularly minded white guys, because nothing could be further from the truth, especially in the United States, based on my 4 years of serving with them. I think it was Christopher Hitchens that said that the military was the great engine for integration in our society. You'll never see a more diverse group of people than you will find in the military. You have Christians, Muslims, Jews, white people, brown people, black people, all people from all over the world, different languages, all uniting around common principles. And it's a really remarkable thing to see in light of the bloodbath of history. So yeah, I'm pretty excited to kind of show that side of the veteran community, and I think we did a really good job representing here today. That's my brief farewell. And one more time, I'll say I really appreciate you guys coming on the podcast again. And I look forward to bringing you on again in the future to have our discussion around whether Yahweh is the good guy or not in the Garden of Eden. Actually, I think that would tie in nicely to some of the side threads that we pursued here today. So anyway, guys, have a great day, and thanks again. We really appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, sure.
Jeff,
go ahead. Sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that, again, as an encouragement, a victory isn't always victory is sometimes a hidden phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at you think of the Christian religion, I've probably said this before, you see, Christ's on the cross, right? A crucifixion. The resurrected Christ isn't the more common one. It's Christ hanging on the cross, because that's the human experience, suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And yet for Christians, we believe there is hidden victory, power over the devil and all evil, and the kingdom of abuse and kingdom of darkness and all that kind of stuff. Victory over all the bad, right? Forgiveness of sins, peace with God, and all that. In the Christian mindset, the idea is that, if you living by faith means not trusting the things that you see. So here we are in this unusual place in history. We often feel like we're on the wrong side, right? We're the losing, not on the wrong side, but on the losing team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a dangerous mindset to be stuck in. And that will, that's the kind of stuff that makes you not want to do the stuff you guys are advising your viewers to do, right? But to keep in mind, whether you're Christian or not, that victory can be a hidden phenomenon. I think that would just be one thing, as just a chaplain here, to hope that that can encourage all of you, whoever you are, so God bless you guys. Thanks for having me. I feel really unworthy being with you two guys. And like you said, I've said before, I'm living out of country now. I feel bad that I'm not doing more with V4F. So this is the least I could do. So my pleasure. So God bless you guys. Okay. Yeah.
I think we all feel that way to a degree there, Padre. That is probably the one angst that I feel more than anything these days. It's all these other things that I still need to get to, that I haven't addressed yet. But, the battle is still young, and we're still recruiting our troops. So soon enough, I think we'll be able to spread the wealth a little more, so I can do some deep dives. But yeah, I mean, I can empathize with that position. I think we're all just kind of yearning to do more. James, did you want to throw in another thought before you go there, pal?
Just one last point. Thanks so much again for bringing that up. It's the Canadian Armed Forces has this amazing opportunity and this amazing potential, like it already has been showing and does in very important ways. It continues to show the best possible things that can come out of that kind of an organization. What you spoke to, Jeff, this idea that all these different people, true actual diversity and inclusion in a real, deep, meaningful sense can happen there, where people, despite their differences and their backgrounds, they've come together under a common cause and a common purpose. So I would encourage everybody, of course, if you're still serving, to continue to live out that purpose and to to be that change and to show what we are capable of in the best possible sense, and to hold fast to this ideal and not allow the machinations of a few corrupted individuals in places, the spiritual wickedness in high places. Don't allow that to take away from the great potential that you can have as an institution to show the rest of the world and your peers the way that we ought to be conducting ourselves.
Yeah, I do. I was out marching with James Top there the last few days. I did 4 days, 149 kilometers while he was here on Cape Breton Island, home of my heart and place of my retirement. And when I was getting my picture taken with him at the end, I was just saying, hardest man on the planet, bro. You're the hardest man on the planet. And he said, I'm just a regular guy. And I was like, yeah, I know. So am I. And that is kind of the difference, I think, the only difference between guys like James Top and everybody else who's just kind of wondering, like, what am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to do? The difference is that, we understand that regular people are capable of great things. And a lot of people out there haven't woken up to that fact yet. And it's kind of up to us to show them the way, right? So very well said, James. Thanks. And with that, folks, guys, this is a great conversation. We're up to 2:20 now, 2 hours and 20 minutes. So that's really impressive. It felt like nothing. And that's always a really good sign. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope everybody else did too. So with that, I'll say stay frosty and stay safe out there, troops. Take care.